How's it going, everyone? It is I, Anime Outlet, and this is part 4 of What If Deku Had Kaioken. And now, before I start this What If off, I would like to thank Damnushi for making the thumbnails for this series. And now, let's begin. Izuku would drop down to the ground, falling to his knees, as he would be clenching the floor in severe pain, as that is the reaction of what would happen after using such a harmful technique such as Kaioken. Todoroki would rush over towards Izuku before picking him up and putting his arm around his shoulder, as they would then walk to where the entire class was sitting, right in the center of the USJ, just sort of contemplating what was happening, as all of a sudden a massive purple portal would open, as a Nomu twice the size of the first one would then be pushed out, as it would then see a finger point over towards the class as it was directly pointing right at Izuku, as the Nomu would then glare towards Izuku before screeching and rushing towards him. Izuku would, with barely any strength he had left, would push all of his classmates aside, using just a key and just a force push or something like that to get all of his classmates out of the way, as this Nomu would then rush over at Izuku and would punch him in the stomach, sending him flying into the roof as the glass would shatter above him, as Izuku would then fall down to the ground, slamming into the ground, as the Nomu would then rush back over to Izuku before picking him up by his head, as the Nomu could hold Izuku's head basically within its 2 fingers, as this Nomu would then start to slam Izuku all around the place before throwing him down to the ground, as Izuku would look up with just the last bit of strength he had, would yell for his classmates to get out of here while the thing was still focused on him, as the classmates would rush over and would pick up Aizawa before rushing out of the door, as Ito would then use all of his strength to rush to UA and would inform Nezu, as Izuku would be sitting there being beaten up by this Nomu. As we then see King Kai's planet. This isn't good, King Kai. Usually something like this would be no problem for him, but he had just used Kaioken. He's quite weak after such a technique. I'm afraid he might die here. Well, anyways, if he does die, we should be able to get him back up here and start more training. The problem would be getting him back down there, since we don't really know if the Dragon Balls still exist, and we don't have any of them to wish you back down there to see if they do exist. We'll just have to hope that he survives this, which I think is pretty good odds, as Izuku would then look up towards the Nomu and would then start to power up. He knew he couldn't just die here after all. If he did, he would disappoint Goku and King Kai. He would also leave his student just without much knowledge, as he really hadn't trained Todoroki all too much, only training him up to some basic ki control in a few weeks, so he didn't train him any big attacks or even Kaioken, but he still wasn't sure if he should teach him that. So Izuku would power up to the most he could, powering up to 4% Kaioken, or 4 times Kaioken, jumping right at the Nomu, sending a punch so powerful it would go right through the Nomu's stomach. However, the fibers and muscle tissue would end up forming right back, as the Nomu's stomach would then be right back there, however with a big scar just around it, as Izuku would then jump back before powering up even further, yelling out an attack that Goku had learned at a very young age and would end up teaching it and passing it down to Izuku. This, of course, being the Kamehameha wave. I believe that's how you pronounce it. So Izuku would power up before saying Kamehameha, before he would then power up to Kaioken times 7, which was the max he could do for barely a minute. So Izuku would then just yell ha, sending a massive ki blast right barreling towards the Nomu, as it would then erase the top half of the Nomu, as the bottom half would fall down to his knees, as it would then slam down into the ground, sending a massive pool of dust just hurtling into the air, as Izuku would then fall back down to his knees, as blood was now just falling right down his head, as Izuku would look on barely to see All Might smash through the doors, as Izuku would look over towards All Might before falling back down to just to the ground. He was completely unconscious. He had used every bit of energy that he had. And a month would end up passing, Izuku just in a sleeping state, as if he was in a coma, as he was really just regenerating all of his energy that he had lost in the fight. He really had used so much of it, as Izuku was already weak, and then he used even more energy that he just didn't have, so his body needed a very long time to recover. And so when Izuku would wake up, he would feel refreshed and as if he was stronger than ever, as Izuku would end up stepping out from the recovery girl's office. She would see Izuku standing and stretching. "What are you doing? You still need time to rest. You should still be in bed." As Izuku would brush her off, saying that he doesn't need to rest, he needs to train. He has a lot of exercises he needs to catch up on for however long he was out for. As he had seen a digital clock which had shown the date, as he was surprised that he had been out for a month, but he really wasn't at all because he's taken longer naps before this when he's used so much of his energy, as his longest nap was really 2 months, which when he woke up from that on King Kai's planet, he had to do so much extra training. Izuku knew he would have to get right back into the training, as he really didn't want to be behind on anything. So Izuku would start to do this, as Recovery Girl would tell him that the UA Sports Festival is tomorrow, so he should probably still be getting rest and not training, and using up more of the body's energy that it probably doesn't even have anymore. So when Izuku would end up just going to the school the next day, Izuku would be told how it's the UA Sports Festival and how all of the students had a month off to prepare, and that they will now get onto a bus and drive off to the UA Sports Festival arena. When they would arrive, they would get changed before heading out onto the field, as Midnight would then tell them what the first event would be and how everything's going to be structured, with 3 events, as the last event being a 1v1 tournament, and the winner, the second place, and the third place all get medals, either a gold, silver, or bronze. So Izuku would end up stretching as the race would then begin. Izuku, and along with all of his classmates, would be pushed into just sort of a hall, as there was 2 groups, as there were so many students in the first year that they couldn't put all of the students out into this just one race. So Izuku would be pushed out onto the first race with half of his class, while half of his class would be pushed out onto the second race. This would also be how the cavalry battle would end up happening, and how the 1v1 tournament would end up happening. This first group, whoever makes it from this first group onto the 1v1 tournament, would end up being on one side of the bracket, while the second group would be on the other side, as they mixed it up quite well with how strong others were. However, this wasn't really the best way to test each other's strength, instead of just having one large pool of people. So Izuku would end up getting into a starting position as the doors would open, as Izuku would zoom off, flying past all of the obstacles that he could, as he would see a massive 0-pointer in his way, as he would just fly right through it, creating a massive hole in it, as it would then start to fall, as many students would jump through it, grabbing onto the ledge and pulling themselves up, as Izuku would then make it to the next event, which was an obstacle course where you had to jump, and if you fell down into the cavern, then you really just couldn't get up and you would be eliminated. However, since Izuku could fly, he easily got past this, along with the minefield, which he just flew right over. So he would land and then cross the finish line in a record pace. Not even a third-year student had even gotten close to Izuku's time. So Izuku would end up getting first place, as some of his other classmates would end up getting in second or third. Bakugo would end up getting second, however Todoroki would end up getting first in his category, as Todoroki was in the other section. So Izuku would then make up his team and would tell them how, since he knows about all the cavalry battle, as they had just explained it, and how he thinks they should try to stay safe. Anyone who would get close to him, Izuku would just send a ki blast directly at them, and then this would cause them to not go for him because they could fear getting hurt. So they would end up doing this as Izuku would don the 10 million point headband, putting it on, as all of them would then be pushed out onto the arena. So the cavalry battle, both of the groups for the race would end up being pushed together. However, it would depend on which side you were, would end up going on to which side of the tournament. And just conveniently, the same amount of people who were on one side of the race and the other side passed. So they didn't have to put someone, say, who or is in the first group onto the second group bracket. So Izuku would easily pass the cavalry battle, as he would now know that it was time for the 1v1 tournament, as he would then pass Todoroki and would tell him, "I'll meet you in the finals," as Todoroki would do the same to Izuku. As Izuku hadn't known it, but Todoroki was training his absolute hardest. He knew about the sports festival, and he knew that's where he wanted to beat Izuku. He had been training for so long, and he was going to beat Izuku for it. He had seen what he did to the Nomu, and that was just fuel to the fire that was just Todoroki's training and all of that. He trained so much harder because he wanted to beat Izuku in the finals of the sports festival, training his ki every single day until he passed out. When he would wake up, he would eat, then do the exact same thing, passing out, waking up, eating, training, and then passing out again. He would do this so much and would end up getting so much stronger because of it. So when the 1v1 tournament would start, Todoroki, not even using his ice or fire quirk, would easily blast through the competition, sending ki blasts at them, just a singular ki blast, and it was a tiny, small ball of ki. As it would go, as they would laugh, saying, "Oh, what's this thing going to do?" And when they would touch it, they would be sent flying back in a ring-out knockout. As Todoroki was able to do this all until the finals, as he had made it onto the final round. However, Izuku's matches wouldn't go as easy, as the first match he was doing would be against Shinso, as Izuku would end up being stopped by one of his classmates, who would end up telling him about how this kid has some sort of brainwashing quirk. He's not quite sure, but that's what he can remember. He answered one of his questions and then his mind went blank, so he would just be warning Izuku not to answer any of this mysterious kid's questions. Izuku would thank his friend as he would then step on to the arena, as Shinso, who had seen Izuku be stopped by his friend, would end up telling Izuku, "Oh, so you're gonna believe that monkey?" As Izuku would not even say a thing. Izuku knew Shinso was trying to get a reaction out of him, so Izuku would start to rush towards Shinso, as Shinso would then flinch but also throw a punch at the same time, as Izuku would grab this punch before turning his fist, as Shinso's fist would then connect right with his lower jaw, sending his jaw flying up as his teeth would then slam down into each other, as Shinso would look at Izuku as his eyes were closed, and when they would open, they would see a fist barreling towards his head, as Izuku's fist would connect right in between his eyes, slamming him down into the ground, pushing his head back and then straight down, as Shinso would slam right into the ground and would barely be able to just open his eyes, as Izuku would then ask the person there, being Midnight, if Shinso was okay to continue paddling, as Midnight would then ask, "Shinso, are you still alright to continue on with the fight?" As Shinso, not answering at all, still being in a daze, wouldn't answer at all. So Midnight would then give the win to Izuku. Izuku's second battle would end up being against Ochako Uraraka, someone that had basically just been staring at Izuku the entire time that he was in any of the UA classrooms or in her presence. She was just staring at Izuku while she had basically said nothing to him at all. as Izuku would find this quite weird, but really couldn't bother with it, as he just thought she was just staring at something else. As Izuku had a window seat, maybe she was staring out of the window at maybe a bird or something. Izuku really just couldn't catch anything on about what Uraraka was trying to tell him. As Izuku would end up seeing this, as Uraraka would then get into a stance. She had also been training, as she knew maybe if she could beat Izuku, then she could maybe get recognized by him, or if she can put up a good fight against him, as she had heard Izuku talking about how he wants a good fight and he really hasn't gotten one. Well, that was before the USJ incident, after all. So when the match would begin, Izuku would stand there before getting into a stance, waiting for Uraraka to strike first, and that is what she would do, as she would then make herself float before going into the air, as she would connect all of her fingertips, saying release, as she would then fly back down to Izuku as if throwing a punch, which would be a fake out, and would then try to throw a kick, which would end up being blocked by Izuku's arm, as Izuku would then smile at her before saying, "You're gonna have to try a lot harder than that if you want to land a hit on me," as Uraraka would jump back before rushing to do an attack again. However, Izuku would connect his hands together and would then close his eyes, as she would then throw another kick, which Izuku would then block, grabbing her leg and slamming her down into the ground, as Izuku would then grab both of her hands, putting them behind her back, as Izuku would then walk towards just the edge of the arena, hoping to get a just ring out victory. So Uraraka would start to struggle very, very hard, not wanting for her match to end up losing just so easily like this, as she would start to struggle even more, and right as she was at just the end of the arena, she would end up being let go, as she would then make herself float right at the edge. So Izuku, seeing this, would then smile, knowing that Uraraka wasn't going to be doing a ring out victory. So Izuku would then start to focus his energy, knowing he's probably going to have to do a key attack for this. So Izuku, calming his mind, would end up flying up and would end up rushing towards Uraraka, who would try to dodge, but Izuku would then grab on to her neck before flying back down to the ground, as she would end up struggling but would know this was over, as Izuku, who had wanted a ring-out victory, would end up getting one, as Izuku would then smile as he would say, "Well, you lasted longer than I thought you would. Good job. Your martial art techniques were quite good. They could use some polishing up." As Izuku would then walk away, as Uraraka would just smile there, thinking that she had been noticed. So Izuku would then see who his opponent was for the semi-finals. It was Bakugo Katsuki. As Izuku would see this, as he would then think, wonder what he's been doing besides training all this time. Ever since the Heroes vs. Villains fight, he's probably been training so hard to try and beat me. Well, that's not the case. Might as well just humiliate him after what he's done to me. As Bakugo would end up stepping up before staring and just glaring daggers right at Izuku. However, Izuku wouldn't let this faze him at all. As Izuku would get into his stance, and so would Bakugo. As the match would begin, Bakugo would be sent flying right towards Izuku and would send an explosion mixed with a ki blast. However, this wouldn't faze Izuku at all, just bouncing it back off into the side walls that were protecting the crowd. As Izuku would continue on marching towards Bakugo, as Izuku would then punch Bakugo in the head before wrapping his hand around Bakugo's head, as he would pick him up by the head, dangling his body there, as Bakugo would start to struggle, grabbing onto Izuku's hand, and just making small explosions and ki blasts into Izuku's arm. However, this wouldn't work at all, as Izuku would then would then slam Bakugo's head down into the ground, as Bakugo would then slide along the floor, as when Izuku would see the dust clear, Bakugo was completely knocked out, as Izuku would hear the crowd just not thinking, as they were probably feeling mixed emotions. Should they be excited or should they boo? As this really wasn't a fair fight at all, and Izuku just looked ruthless in what he did to Bakugo, as they didn't know what was happening behind the scenes after all, and what Bakugo had did to Izuku so long ago. And so the final fight would then begin. Izuku, the sensei, versus his student, as this would be the fight Izuku was waiting for, as Todoroki and Izuku would then step up onto the arena. As the match would begin, neither Izuku or Todoroki would end up throwing any punch, waiting for the other to do something, as Todoroki would then speak to Izuku. "This is it, Izuku. I'm finally gonna beat you once and for all. All those 1v1s I've been learning. I've seen your techniques. I know how to beat you." As Izuku would then smile towards Todoroki. "Alright, then give me your best shot. I'll give you 5 attacks. That's all you have before I start attacking you as well." As Todoroki would rush towards Izuku before throwing a punch to Izuku's head, as he would then connect, but Izuku wouldn't look fazed at all, as Todoroki would then make a strong ki blast in his hand. It was the strongest he could possibly do, as Todoroki would slam it into Izuku's chest, but once again he didn't seem to faze at all, as he might have flinched just a tiny bit in pain, but it really wasn't anything too severe at all, as Izuku would then see Todoroki come in with 2 ki blasts, slamming them into his face before throwing another punch, trying just to get Izuku to do anything at all. But this wouldn't work, and Izuku would end up throwing a punch right into Todoroki's stomach, as he would just be sent flying backwards, as he would then stomp on the ground, sending a massive iceberg right towards Izuku, who would slash it with a keyblade, making it shatter into a million pieces, as Izuku would then be blindsided by a massive tornado of fire. However, Izuku would easily dodge out of the way of this, as Todoroki would then send another iceberg. However, when Izuku would shatter it, there inside of it would be a ki blast being sent right at him, as Izuku would end up dodging out of the way, as he would see Todoroki looking up at him, jumping right up at him, and would then start to fly right at Izuku, another thing that Izuku had taught Todoroki, which I just forgot to mention. So, when Todoroki would end up meeting Izuku, he would throw another punch right into Izuku's face, as he would then jump back, as you would see Izuku still standing on the ground, just laughing. "Fine, you drive a hard bargain. All these attacks, I know what you've been trying to make me do. You want me to use my technique, don't you?" As Todoroki would then laugh, just like Izuku had. "What do you think I've been trying to do, Izuku? It's what I've been training for all this time. I want to fight your Kaioken." As Izuku would then smile before powering up into Kaioken ×2, jumping right at Todoroki before sending one punch right at his cheek, sending him flying backwards, as he would barely be able to catch himself from flying back and making it a ring-out victory for Izuku, as Todoroki would then launch himself right back at Izuku. However, this really didn't do anything for him, as Izuku would then slam Todoroki back down into the ground, who would then get up and would fly back at Izuku just with barely as much speed as he had, as Izuku would continue on punching Todoroki every time he came back, maybe mixing in a kick or two, as Todoroki would finally just stop standing up once again before laughing. "Well, I guess I'm no match for your Kaioken," as Todoroki would then fall backwards, completely just unconscious, as Izuku would then smile before walking over towards Todoroki and picking him up. "You had a good fight, Todoroki. I can tell you've been training your absolute hardest the entire time I was out. You did a good job. And that's where I'm gonna leave this what if off, everyone. I thank you all for watching. I really do hope you guys did enjoy or do enjoy this Kaioken series, as I'm going to be doing, I believe, part 5 on Monday, as tomorrow, Saturday, and Sunday are going to be a new what if, which I will reveal to you Saturday morning, so very, very soon. Basically, in around 16 hours or so from the point this is uploaded. So I thank you all for watching once again, and goodbye.